All right, we're back again. Another late night stream here, Saturday night. Today, what we're going to go over is some Dr. Jessica Taylor videos. Now, for those of you who don't know, she is a feminist and a lesbian, but the part I'm interested in is the fact that she doesn't believe in personality disorders. She doesn't believe in narcissism. She doesn't believe in borderline. She doesn't like borderline in particular because she thinks women have been unjustifiably diagnosed as that. And there are things she says that I agree with, and there's things that she says that I don't agree with. But we're going to start going through some of her videos here. And I think it's going to be very interesting to break this down. So let's rock and roll here. There we are. Let's see. This is the first one here.
Listen, stop calling your ex a narcissist. When you talk about them, if they have been abusive, say that for yourself, not for anybody else, but to honor yourself and your own experiences. Your ex was an abuser. Your ex was a perpetrator. Your ex controlled you. Your ex manipulated you. Your ex cheated on you. Your ex assaulted you. Your ex raped you. Your ex beat you up. They're not a narcissist.
Now, you see, I don't mind someone calling their abuser an abuser, and they probably do all of those behaviors she just talked about. But what I never understood about her perspective is why not call them a narcissist? Because I do think there are absolutely people out there that are on the spectrum of narcissism. They have impaired empathy, feelings of grandiosity. They are hypersensitive to criticism and perceived criticism, can be exploitative, and they do harmful things. I don't really see the harm in calling someone a narcissist. I admit it's not a perfect word. It is not a perfect word, meaning there are abusers who may not be a narcissist out there. I agree with that. But narcissist is a useful word because it helps people to find this content, and people have similar experiences of people that act in these similar ways. And the word narcissist helps bring them in so people who are being victimized can find this information and become aware. That's why, even though narcissist is not a perfect word, I think it's useful in that way.
And I know that shorthand has become common, popular on the internet, but it minimizes everything you've been through.
Now, I don't understand why she says that either. Why does it minimize if you call your ex a narcissist? If it's true, true is true, right? Now, and maybe she's saying it's not just narcissism. There could be other elements involved too, but I don't see it as it minimizes it in any way.
Like, listen to this video a couple of times if you've got to get this, but if you consider everything that you've been put through, is narcissist really enough? Is that the right word? And also, don't go down that route of being like, they've got narcissistic personality disorder, they've seriously got traits of narcissism. No. Don't allow that psychiatric language, that excusing, like, oh, it's a mental.
And this is part of her thing here too. She doesn't agree with psychiatric language. She doesn't agree with narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. I don't even think she agrees with things like bipolar or ADHD. Now, don't quote me on that part. I'm not sure what she thinks about the neurodivergent part, but she doesn't like any of that language. And I'm not really sure exactly what the issue is. They're not perfect. None of those are perfect words, but I think sometimes putting a name and label to them, even for the narcissist or even borderlines themselves, I think it can help them get on the path to recovery. That label gives them a sense of ease. Okay, I can finally understand what's going on with me. I have a picture. But she doesn't like the picture that those words paint. And I just don't agree with that. I think it's not as black and white as she says about this.
Mental illness, it's a personality disorder. It's a fucking choice. People behave the way they behave in relationships, whether that was your mom, your dad, your ex. your ex-best friend, whoever it was. They behave like that because they get something out of it.
Now, I do very often, it is a choice. Now, I do think there can be times when someone is so self-absorbed, they're not intentionally going out of their way to do something that's going to hurt you, but it absolutely has that effect because they really just are self-absorbed. They want what they want, and they don't care who it harms or who it hurts. But other times, they are absolutely doing things very intentionally. And there are other professionals out there that some of them I might interview again soon, maybe Dr. Mark Ettinson, for example. I don't think he believes this. I don't think he believes that it's intentional. And I would say it depends because often I think it absolutely is intentional. They know they're trying to get what they want. Then what do narcissistic people want? Power, control, to control their image, narcissistic supply, and to avoid accountability. And they'll do almost anything to get those things accomplished. And they'll do those things very intentionally. Other times, for example, if a narcissist cheats, they just want to do what they want to do. Now, that's going to also harm and hurt others, but they don't really care about that because they're self-absorbed.
There's not some underlying trait of an illness. Be specific and validate yourself by using the correct language for what it is you were put through. Talk about what you were put through, even if it's just to yourself. The violence, the lies, the cheating, the manipulation, the messing with you, the gaslighting, the assaults, the injuries, the recovery, the blatant minimization of everything they ever did to you, turning everybody against you. That sort of, like, be specific, because it doesn't help when we're just using language like, oh, my ex is a narcissist.
So on one hand, I am all for them being specific. Yeah, say coercive control, say gaslighting, say word salad, say flipping the script, say Darvo, say moving the goalpost, say the specific, sure. But I just don't see it as a bad thing to also say narcissism or narcissistic abuse. Now, there are other people that don't like the term narcissist that much either. Dr. Nadine, she prefers the term pathological lover. Dr. Christine Cocciola, she prefers just calling it coercive control because it's all coercive control. And, there's elements of truth in all of it, I think. I think coercive control, sure. And of course, with online presence here too, there can always be an element of, I want to stand out and say something different because now I'm going to get more attention if I do so. When it comes to social media, that has to be something you think about too. Now, it doesn't mean they're all wrong, but that can always go into it.
I think there are a lot more than that, don't you?
All right. So that was her video there on don't call your ex a narcissist. And I don't have a problem with if someone calls their ex a narcissist. But like I always say, the label doesn't matter. The label of what they are doesn't matter nearly as much as their behaviors. The label does help sometimes to help people put the pieces of the puzzle together and to help the pattern recognition. But ultimately, I agree with her that the specific behaviors, they are more important. That's what I would say. But I don't have a problem if people use the word narcissist. Now, we're going to break down another video where she goes more into depth about why she doesn't like personality disorders in general. But I got to find it first. Here's another popular one. Let's read it. So you create rehabilitation programs for offenders and abusers to help them, whilst you medicate, institutionalize, sedate, gaslight, and diagnose their victims for the rest of their lives. But that's a conversation you all are not ready for. And I think this is more of a black and white take. I think there's many things going on to this. I think when it comes to the abusers and the people who are doing the offending, I think they do things so that they can protect future people from being victims of those people. So they'll try to rehabilitate them. Now, granted, depending on what the issue is, their issues can have a very high recidivism rate, sure. But if you anything that drops it, I think would also be a good thing. And I'm not sure what diagnosis she's referring to if you're a victim. I'm not sure if she's referring to CPTSD or maybe borderline or whatever that might be. But I think, healing trauma, whether you have PTSD or CPTSD or something else, at least you know something to work on. And I think her thing also is personality disorders are really trauma-based. So narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, they're really just reactions to trauma. And I don't think that paints the whole picture, because if that's all it was, everyone who has had childhood trauma would develop what would be considered a personality disorder. But that's not true. Why isn't it true? Because I think there are certain genetic components and inherent traits that are already there that can be activated by other things as well. But I also think it doesn't take that much activation sometimes either. So that's what she's saying about that. But what else does she say?
Okay, so this is a video about the last video where you were asking me to explain why I don't believe personality disorders exist as a psychologist. And then in those comments, everybody's asking me whether that extends to things like narcissistic personality disorder, psychopathy, and sociopathy. So otherwise known as, if you've never heard anyone pronounce it like that, I hadn't before my PhD, is people that call others or themselves psychopaths or sociopaths, which you might have heard on TV as well. So we're prepared to go down a second rabbit hole with this. So I'm an anti-pathology psychologist. I'm trauma-informed. I don't believe in labeling. I don't believe any mental disorders exist. So that includes narcissistic personality disorder and also sociopathy.
So before she gets into her explanation, the reason why I do believe NPD and BPD exist is because some people absolutely have impaired empathy and they don't have nearly that much of an issue harming other people. And they have that sense of grandiosity and feelings of superiority. They have entitlement. They have the hypersensitivity to criticism and perceived criticism. They exploit. They use narcissistic fuel. Those are real things. So the fact to say that all exists because of a trauma, I just don't buy that. I do think there's such a thing as an overcompensatory narcissist. Those are the ones that would be overcompensating for insecurity. I do think they exist. I just don't think that's all of them. I think some of them absolutely feel superior. And if you read the studies on bullies that Dr. George Simon talks about, bullies have too much self-esteem, more so than the other way around. People would always say they must feel so terrible about themselves to be bullying others. But then they found the opposite in these studies. Bullies have too much self-esteem. And the people who are bullied, they are the ones that often have too little self-esteem. They don't have the assertiveness a lot of times to stand up to it. So a lot of people in the traditional paradigm of psychology, they think if someone's acting grandiose and superior, they must be trying to overcompensate for feelings of inadequacy or insecurity. And while sometimes that's true, I don't think it's always true. But that's what Dr. Taylor here believes. She believes that they would be overcompensating and it's part of a trauma. But let's hear what she has to say.
Stupid bloody thing making that noise. Sociopathy and psychopathy. So I have lots of different reasons for this, again, based in context. But one of the most interesting things that I want to raise is around the use of psychiatry and psychology and pathologization in a way that minimizes, excuses, or explains away violent, abusive, controlling behavior. So what we've seen is this huge increase of people sort of calling each other narcissists, or saying, oh, my abusive ex had MPD. He's obviously got narcissistic personality disorder. She's obviously a narcissist. And I understand that can help people, but I personally believe that it's better to actually name the behavior. So are they cruel? Are they selfish? Were they abusive to you? Were they violent? Did they manipulate you? Did they lie to you? Did they keep cheating on you? Because claiming they have a personality disorder and being like, oh, they must have a personality disorder, it's minimizing their behavior. It's giving them an excuse.
Okay, so that's the part I don't agree with. I do agree with being specific. I don't have a problem with that at all because, like I always say, the behaviors are more important than the label. The difference is, I don't think giving them the label of a personality disorder is an excuse. It's an explanation, perhaps, but that's certainly not excuse. Just like in the same way, I would say trauma is not an excuse for poor behavior. Yeah, you've been traumatized. Yeah, you've had issues, but that doesn't mean it's okay now to harm other people. That doesn't mean it's okay to be completely self-absorbed. No, that's not what it means. So more than one thing can be true at the same time. Yes, you can have narcissistic personality disorder and you can do all of those things, or you might be a psychopath with antisocial personality disorder. But just because you have that label, that's not an excuse. I think both of those things can be true.
It's giving them a way out. It's giving them this get out of jail free card. Like, it's not my fault. I had narcissistic personality.
Yeah, but that's not what it means, though. In fact, it could be the opposite of, okay, and granted, most narcissists aren't going to do this, but some narcissists, such as Lee Hammock, the Batwolf, Nameless Narcissist, etc., Kylie Rackham, if they can admit they have a problem, they can at least work towards behavior modification. And the label can give them a sense of ease. Okay, at least I know what I'm dealing with here. That's not an excuse. Like, I just don't buy that. I mean, if someone has a disease of addiction, as they might call it, is that an excuse? No, you still need to take accountability. It's an explanation. An explanation is not an excuse. You still need to take accountability. You still got to take a look at your side of the street.
Disorder. And I, as somebody who's worked with victims for 15 years, I personally don't think that victims of abuse, violence, trauma, oppression, power, control, whatever, I don't think we have anything to gain from framing these people, whoever they are, whether they're in the government or whether they're our ex, as mentally ill, as having a personality disorder. So that's one of my first points. My second points around psychopathy especially is that when I was doing my PhD, I also was really lucky to be tutored by a guy who was like, oh my gosh, he was like Einstein in psychometrics. And I was really, really lucky to be taught by him. So I took advanced psychometrics during my PhD, and psychometrics are those questionnaires that you see, on a Likert scale around sort of like strongly disagree to strongly agree about like your thoughts or your behaviors or your emotions or somebody else's. One of the first things he taught me was that those psychometrics are not as valid as we think they are. And one of the examples that he used in our lectures was the one that's used for psychopathy, and actually said that some studies have found that the instrument, the questionnaire, because there's no other test for psychopathy, there's no brain scan, there's no blood test. The only thing we have is a questionnaire that is a self-report measure.
Now, there are some, and I've commented this to her before too, but there are brain scans that show impaired empathy. Now, she said to me, they are not admissible in court, and so she dismissed it in that way. And I don't have as much of a problem with Dr. Taylor here. I think I could have a good discussion with her. Some of her followers, on the other hand, I'm not the biggest fan of them, because just me asking her a question, I got hit with, and granted, she's a feminist, so it's not surprising, but her fan base was like, you're mansplaining. She didn't ask for your opinion. I'm like, it's a social media forum. We're trying to have a discussion. She's like, no. And they gave me a chart of what mansplaining is. Like, did she ask? Does she have more credentials than you? Because if so, shut up. I'm like, oh, this is hideous.
Which means the person can choose how they answer. When you actually give that to large samples of just the general public, up to 50% of people hit enough criteria to be seen as a psychopath. Now,
that 50%. Now, if you talk to Dr. Mark Ettinson, he talks about the narcissistic personality inventory, the NPI. That's how they're supposed to measure narcissism. I'm not sure what she's talking about here with this 50% would meet the criteria for psychopathy. Now, granted, she's in England, so perhaps they do things a little bit different there too.
That presents lots of other arguments. First of all, 1 in 2 people psychopaths?
Of course not.
Who knows? Second of all, is the test almost like not sensitive enough, or that it groups too many people into it so that more people than should come out with the correct almost like criteria or score in order to be seen as a psychopath? So that's a problem as well. Is it the language, or is it the way people respond to it? Is it the way people understand it?
And that's the thing with any questions or any study, you have to get as much information about it as possible to see how accurate it could be. You got to see the questions they ask, how they ask them, the sample size of the study, how many people are in the study, how did they choose the people to be in the study, who's funding the study. All of these things absolutely contribute to the answers. And so that's why I don't like believing just blindly when people cite studies. It's not my favorite. I prefer to see with my eyes. I trust what my eyes tell me. I trust my gut. But if I were to trust a study, I would really have to dig deep into all of those variables and factors because they all contribute. And sometimes I would say, oh, of course the results came out as this because you asked the questions this way. That altered the whole thing. So if whatever test or study she's talking about, where 1 out of 2 people were considered eligible for psychopathy, I mean, that's a study that I would just ignore because what the heck is that?
Is there some level of effect there of being like, well, maybe they want to answer in that certain way, or maybe they don't answer in a certain way? You know, we also need to consider things like socially desirable responding, which is like people respond to these things in the way that they think they would be desired to answer, whether that's good or bad. Okay. So if we get back to, you know, do I believe psychopaths and sociopaths exist in a medical sense? My answer has to be no. I don't think it's a medical illness. I don't think it's a mental health issue. I don't think it's a mental disorder. I don't think we can treat people who demonstrate, you know, abusive, violent, dangerous, manipulative tendencies with zero empathy and all that sort of thing. I don't think that is a disorder of the mind. I think that we live in a society that actually encourages those behaviors. And I think it'd be naive of us to believe that it's a bad apple rather than a bad barrel. Let's put it that way.
Interesting way to put it. Now, I don't completely disagree with that. I think, but again, more than one thing can be true at the same time. I think there are individual bad apples, and I think society can contribute to some things. But I think what society contributes to has its limits. I mean, for example, especially with narcissists, you look at the world leaders that are narcissists or other stars, celebrities, they get rewarded for seeking attention, admiration, acknowledgement. And people in fights, for example, the UFC, Conor McGregor, he gets rewarded for talking trash and talking smack. His behavior gets rewarded by society. So I'll say that part's true. But in terms of psychopathy, and there's varying degrees of severity to psychopathy, I would say some of them, they have that from the beginning. It's not all the environment or the barrel, in my eyes, that's doing that.
We are surrounded by politicians, celebrities, leaders, influencers who have actually demonstrated repeatedly that if you are selfish, callous, violent, abusive, a liar, sexually abusive.
She knew what I was going to say.
Abuse your partners, you know, manipulate every narrative around you, that actually you'll end up very successful. And that when the justice system comes knocking, you'll probably be found not guilty and nothing will probably happen to you. So we're feeding people from a young age narratives that would suggest that actually there's nothing wrong with this behavior, and that as a society we might not like it very much, but what really happens if you behave like this? Not a lot, really. So,
and that all depends on what they do, I would say. Now, part of what I think she's referring to is how hard it is to prosecute SA, and she would be correct. It is difficult to prosecute that. But other things that are more provable, they will try. But again, she's talking about some of this from a feminist lens, where she thinks a lot of the crimes by men are not being prosecuted properly. And there could be some truth in that.
I guess my argument there is, if so many people behave in these horrible, horrific ways that harm other people, is that a mental disorder? Or is that actually them just playing out the behaviours that they've seen over and over again, that people have been rewarded for, or that people are just, I guess, just allowed to behave that way? And if you think about your family hierarchies and who is allowed to behave in a certain way, you might have abusers in your family that have never actually been challenged.
I think it's a combination of both. I don't think the barrel can create a personality disorder. The barrel meaning the environment. I think people have that, and then society can make it worse. But I don't think society can create an actual psychopath. I don't think the what gets rewarded can do that. It can give you some of the behaviors, the traits, but I think that's different than having the inherent traits that you were born with, that impaired empathy piece. I think that's a different ballgame. So just like with the narcissistic traits that get rewarded, just like narcissistic fleas is not being a full-blown narcissist. So too, what gets rewarded, I don't think is going to make you a full-blown narcissist. Some of the behaviors might look similar, but that's different.
Things that have never been confronted, people who are incredibly controlling, abusive, liars, whatever, and like that behavior just stays there, doesn't it? Like nobody really does anything about it. So why would that mean that if that is allowed to happen in society, why would that person then have a mental disorder for displaying those behaviors? So there's all that around it as well. I think that honestly, there is a bit of an obsession around like calling people psychopaths, sociopaths. Oh, they're a psycho. My ex is a psycho. Donald Trump's a psycho. Everyone's a psycho.
I mean, Donald Trump, he certainly has narcissistic personality disorder. To not be political about it, his personality presentation is NPD. And I think that's pretty clear for almost every licensed professional to say.
It's like, what are you achieving? Like, what do you want from this? Do you want them to be able to be like, that's right, I'm a psychopath and I can't help murdering 42 people or raping everyone in my family. I'm sorry, I can't help it. I'm ill. Like, do you really believe that?
Just because they say that doesn't mean it's true. They're just trying to get away with it. That's all it is. It's a manipulation tactic to avoid accountability. They're going to say what they can say. Everyone else knows, no, it's not just that. They're disordered and they're saying what they can to get away with something. I don't think anyone's saying it should be an excuse. At least I don't say that. Maybe there are other people out there saying that, but I don't say that. I think, no, if they do the crime, there has to be accountability. And just because you have issues, just because you were abused as a child, it doesn't mean that you get a free pass to harm people in your adult life. That's not how it works. Sometimes things can be an explanation, but like we talk about a lot, just because someone has childhood trauma doesn't mean they're going to turn into a full-blown narcissist and start abusing others. Why is that the case? Why is it that not everyone who experiences severe childhood trauma turns out like that? Well, I think the genetic component is the big piece that is missing there. So it's not just the environment, not just the barrel, as she says. I think there's a lot of stuff going into it.
That they're ill and that that they need like some sort of medical treatment for their behavior? Or is it more likely that we live in a society actually that encourages that behavior at a deep level, and everything from fucking films through to the way we parent our kids and the way that we let them, I don't know, get away with things that they shouldn't, or we protect them from real consequences in their behavior, or I don't know, they're bullying some kid at school and the parents go in and defend their kid to the nth degree because like, my child would never behave like that.
She's right about that part. There are some overprotective parents out there, entitled parents, that think their kids are God's gift to the earth and they think their kids can do no wrong. And if you ever talk to teachers of elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids, most of them will tell you the parents are the worst part of their job because their parents can be out of control.
What do you think you're creating long term? So anyway, long story, I suppose. You could talk about it again, could talk about this for ages, but in terms of the evidence base around this stuff, like these are essentially they're labels, they're metaphors of how we understand behaviors that we don't like and behaviors that make us very, very uncomfortable. From an evolutionary psychological point of view, is violence an illness? Probably not. Like, I don't like it. I'm a victim of violence as well. I don't think people should be able to just be like, well, we've evolved to be violent, disgusting, horrible species, so why not? We may as well carry on. Like, I understand that there's laws and that sort of thing. Like, there's social norms, etiquettes, behaviours. But does breaking those rules of society constitute a mental illness?
So the big thing is when it's persistent and pervasive across many areas of life. That's when it would cross over into personality disorder territory. It's not just select areas, but when it's persistent and pervasive and usually starts at a younger age, now you cross over into personality disorder territory. And this is when we're talking about whether it's borderline or narcissism. You have to have those core traits, and it has to be persistent and pervasive.
In my view, no. And that's why you never find in my stuff, you'll never catch me like going on the internet being like, this person's a psycho. They've clearly got MPD. They're clearly a sociopath. Because I think that there's other explanations for people's behaviors, and I don't like minimizing, labeling their behavior as a mental disorder. I'd rather them take accountability for how they've behaved or what the things that they're saying and doing.
Okay. So in terms of that one, I just don't think it's minimizing it to give it a label. I don't think that's the case. I think it helps people. I think it helps the victims, and it can even help the person that has the issue if they're willing to do something about it. I don't see it as minimizing it. I don't see it as an excuse. And I don't really see the harm of the labels either, for that matter. If you say Ted Bundy is a psychopath, what's the harm in doing that? Does anyone think he's not accountable for his actions because he's a psychopath? I don't think so. The law doesn't think so. He was executed. He was put into the electric chair. I mean, is there a time where we think the law doesn't take into account that you're still accountable for your actions? I mean, you could argue sometimes justice isn't served, but for the most part, if they catch you and they catch you red-handed, they're going to hold you accountable regardless of what your label is. Now, a defense lawyer might try to say, well, they were abused as a child, they struggled with addiction, their parents abandoned them, but that usually doesn't prevent the sentence. At the best, they might try to minimize the sentence, but that's still not an excuse. Let's see what else she's got here. What else would it be interesting to watch? Just me validating that you're right, by the way. Let's see what this is about. Now let's see what this is about. My internal screaming when I hear another psychologist claim that victims of abuse are mentally ill and need medications for life, whilst totally ignoring their trauma and what... I can't read the stupid bottom of that. But I mean, what kind of mental illnesses are they giving people that are abused? I don't think CPTSD is a mental illness. Is she saying they're giving them the diagnosis of borderline? Is that what she's saying? This is something I'd want to ask her about. And if you guys are interested, I'll invite her on the show. I'm not going to do it to be like a debate. I'll disagree with her. But just because I disagree doesn't mean it's going to be a debate. Let's see. Let's see what this one is.
So from my last post, loads of people have been asking me why I don't believe that personality disorders exist.
And this is the first video. That on the one I just watched was the second one of this series.
So I'm a psychologist. I'm trauma informed and I'm anti-pathology. So I don't believe any mental disorders exist, which is quite a radical concept for lots of people. But specifically, this video is going to explain my position on personality disorders. and the reasons why, sorry, my voice is going, the reasons why I don't believe they exist outside of theory, you know? And I'm well aware that millions of people, predominantly women and girls, which I'll get into, are actually diagnosed with personality disorders. I understand.
Now, there's a reason for that too, I would say. I think a lot of the reason is women are just more likely to reach out for help. And men, narcissism was originally considered a male disorder. And what's one of the core traits of narcissism? Never thinking you're wrong, never admitting you have an issue. So you never go through the door of treatment unless you're forced by the courts or you get a severe ultimatum from your partner or something along those lines. So when it comes to the numbers of narcissists out there, I don't think they're accurate at all. Because was there a narcissist checkpoint somewhere in life? No, they're just averaging it out. They're guesstimating on certain things. But to me, they have no idea. They really don't know. So there's tons of narcissists out there that are narcissists. They're just not diagnosed because they never got into the door. Women, I think, are just more likely to get help. And that's my experience even as a coach myself. I help people through narcissistic abuse. Way more women reach out to help usually than men do.
That people are being diagnosed with them every single day. I understand people are on medication for them or have had extensive therapy for them. But I'm going to tell you why I don't subscribe to the concept of a personality
+1 for her saying subscribe. I like that.
Disorder. So I've got lots and lots of different reasons. I'm going to try and get through them in one take. So you have to bear with me. So the first and most obvious point for me is that personality disorders are socially constructed. So it means that even the concept of like, you have a disordered personality, your personality is disordered, for me is like, what does that even mean? And who decided that?
So she says, she's going to say that middle-aged white men in particular decided what a disorder was. But I mean, I would say if someone's consistently doing harmful behaviors and they have impaired empathy and they act for narcissistic fuel at all times to get attention, admiration, and acknowledgement, they lie constantly, they screw people over, I think that is a problem. I think that is a problem. I think it's a problem across all cultures. There's narcissistic people in all cultures. They might not call it that, but I think that's absolutely what it is. And it's similar to how when I was talking to Dr. Salerno, we talked about, is there a spiritual component to narcissism? If you look at the Bible, they have elements of it in the Bible, the Jezebel spirit. If you look at the Romans and the Greeks, they have elements of it in their gods. And there's other kind of stories, and sometimes people would say demons, especially when it comes to psychopaths. But I think this is a human constant. I don't think it's as dependent on the middle-aged white men of middle class and what they've decided is a personality disorder. I think they're all describing a very similar thing that is just relevant to humans. And this has been passed down through all of the generations. It's just a thing. I mean, you even look at the Bible. Cain and Abel, right? One of them murdered the other. So that's been a thing. This has been part of humans' nature. And there's other stories from other cultures that are very similar to that. So I don't think that it's socially constructed. I think it's part of us as humans.
And on what basis? And whose personality are you being measured against? Like, is it the psychiatrist? Is it the men who made up this concept? Is it some optimum personality person that they created or have met and have got?
Now, and it's an interesting question to ask. I approve of her even asking the question, what is normal? That's a good question. Some people would say there is no normal. But I do think also most people can recognize if they've truly been with a narcissist, there's a problem with them. There's a problem with them no matter what you call it. And it's not the norm. If someone's going to be a pathological liar, cheat, harm people, use the process of coercive control, and abuse others, I don't know if it matters what you call that. That's a problem. And that's not normal. And the word narcissist or psychopath or whatever is just a label to describe that pattern, a pattern that many people do. So many narcissists use the pattern of coercive control. Now, do they all? Well, that's up for debate too. And maybe I'll ask that with Dr. Solano. It's like, do you think the lower end, the lower spectrum narcissists, do they all do a pattern of coercive control? It's debatable. Debatable.
On that is the perfect personality. And if you don't hit these particular criteria, you have a disordered personality. So like for me, the absolute functional, I don't know, description, definition of a personality disorder makes no sense to me whatsoever, because it's based on a subjective opinion of what somebody believes is like a perfect personality or like an imperfect personality.
I think that's kind of a little bit of a straw man there, because I think if you really examine it, there are abnormal personalities. When I was in school for psychology, there's literally a class called abnormal psychology. And what's the norm? Well, it's harder to define what the norm is. It's easier to see what the norm isn't, though. It's easier to see what is abnormal. And usually these are the people that are harming the people around them. They used to say back when neurotic and character disordered was more of a thing, they would say neurotic people are more likely to get help. The character disordered people, like narcissists and psychopaths, etc., they're more likely to push the people around them to get help because they're having a hard time dealing with that character disordered person.
Which makes no sense to me. And we have no scientific, like there's no blood test, there's no brain scan, there's nothing that's like, aha, this person has this personality.
She's correct that there is no blood test. There are some brain scans. You could argue, as she argued with me, about how accurate they are. But I do think you can see things, like you can see perhaps impaired empathy. But she is correct that when someone is getting a diagnosis of narcissist, they're observing behaviors. That's all the licensed professional is doing. They're maybe asking the NPI, the Narcissistic Personality Index, I think it's called, or they're observing the behaviors. That's it. There's no quantitative way really to measure it. No cut and dry, black and white. It's qualitative and subjective, because for that very reason, there's no blood test. There's no hormone panel for it. It's just they're measuring it with their best guesses.
And this person has this personality. That one needs medication. That one's fine. So that's like the basics. Then if you look at things like what would then constitute a disordered personality around the world, because psychiatry and psychology is incredibly white, westernized.
I think these disordered personalities, they transcend white, black, Asian, Hispanic. They're in every culture. They might call it something different. And perhaps the criteria for each disorder is a little bit different depending on where you are. But in my opinion, people on the spectrum of narcissism, that is cultureless. Regardless of what culture you're in, I think you can be on the spectrum of narcissism as I see it. Each culture might call that something different, but I think it's not dependent on your culture. I think it's more of a human thing.
Colonialist. So I know, for example, that my personality would be and could be medicated, sectioned, and diagnosed as a disorder in other countries around the world. I'm a lesbian, I'm very outspoken, I'm very educated, I'm very confident, I don't really like small talk, I am, quite direct, I have a very dark sense of humor.
Besides you could argue I'm a lesbian too. But besides that part, she's describing me as I would call myself. And it's like, I'm not sure what she's saying they would try to diagnose her as or why they would medicate her. But none of what she said, I think, is medication or diagnosis worthy. Not liking small talk. What's that? That's an old soul. I'm what you would call an outgoing introvert. Being extroverted for too long absolutely exhausts me. This is different. When I'm talking on YouTube like this doesn't exhaust me as quickly because there's a buffer. The energy, I don't feel the energy of everyone watching. But if everyone is right here in front of me, maybe that would be a different story. But this, yeah, she sounds like me in this way.
I like being alone. Um, you know,
I like being alone too.
like I have lots of trauma in my life from when I was a childhood, and like from in my childhood, and like when you put all those things together, if I was in the wrong place in the wrong time, I could very easily find myself sectioned. Does that mean then in that country that they are correct? You know, if I was somewhere else and they were like, Jess has clearly got a personality disorder, she clearly needs to be sectioned for her own good. She doesn't listen to men. She's, you know, she's not married to a man. She's clearly delusional. She's, you know, she believes this, and this. She has all these opinions and thoughts. She never shuts up. Clearly there's something wrong with her. Lock her up. And so that,
I mean, I'm not sure what she's saying is wrong with her. Maybe like back in the day, if a woman was like that in the 1700s, 1800s, before that, perhaps then they would say something like that. But nowadays, I'm not sure what she's referring to.
that brings me to the point that personality disorders are not just socially constructed, they're historically constructed, culturally constructed. So what would be a normal personality in one country would be an abnormal personality in another. And that's the same with religion. You know,
I don't, that would depend to me. I don't completely agree with that.
smaller cultures, maybe sort of towns, regions of particular areas, all the way up to entire countries. So if a personality disorder can be defined and operationalized differently in every country in the world, then it's not a disease or an illness, is it? It's an opinion.
And I don't agree with that because for the reason I said, I believe there is a spectrum of narcissism that involves the feelings of grandiosity and superiority, impaired empathy, hypersensitivity to criticism, entitlement, the exploitation. That's there in humans, I believe. Cultures will diagnose that differently. They might call it different things, but I don't think it's a culture by culture thing like she's saying. I think there are humans that fit that ilk of every culture. That's what I would say about it.
You have to recognize also that these personality disorders have all been defined normally by white, middle class, older men. And
I think that part's irrelevant too, for the reason I just said. I think you go to an African country, I think there are people there on the spectrum of narcissism. That's what I would consider as narcissism. Now, maybe she would be saying, well, maybe there it's not a problem. But if they were to come here to this country, it would still be an issue. And I'm pretty sure it's still an issue in those countries too. It might be harder to recognize depending on where you are, but they still got that base human thing. And she is correct in the way that cultures have different norms and different values. That is true. But I think when it comes to the character disordered and abusive personalities, I mean, I think abuse is abuse. I don't know how much of a cultural difference there'll be in that regard. Now, an exception, maybe if you go to Afghanistan and you would look at how they would treat women in Afghanistan. It's a very patriarchal country because it's Islam, etc. Some of that, depending on the person, there could be some abuse in there and some coercive control. I'm not saying every time, but it definitely could be. Definitely could in some of the time.
You must also understand that the majority of personality disorders are diagnosed in women and girls. So, for example, you're 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder if you're female. That's not.
I mean, they're also learning now that there's many men that are male borderline. They just didn't think so. Men used to be diagnosed as narcissists. Women used to be diagnosed as borderline. But they're learning there are female narcissists and there's male borderlines. But with all personality disorders, they're underdiagnosed because they're not getting help. They're not reaching out a lot of times. A full-blown narcissist, whether it's a man or a woman, they're not reaching out. They're not trying to get help. So how are we going to know how many there are? We're not going to know. And then the other part about it is women more likely to get help anyway, but not a female narcissist. I would doubt that. I would doubt female narcissists are getting help unless they are forced into it, just like a male narcissist isn't getting help unless they're forced into it. Borderlines, more likely. Borderlines, more likely. And Dr. Solano and I, we talked about how There's some arguments about covert narcissism and borderline. Maybe some male borderlines have been misdiagnosed as covert narcissists before. I'm not sure what I think about that. It's possible.
Not a coincidence. That's the way it's designed, right? Same with histrionic personality disorder, which has its roots in hysteria, that women are innately insane, which came from the concept that our uterus, which is the Latin like derivative of that word, floats around our body and makes us insane. And because we have a uterus and men don't have a uterus, that's why women are more emotional. And
1 second here. So, one thing. Nicole says, I think she's referring to being a lesbian. Honestly, that's definitely not accepted everywhere. Correct. Being lesbian, depending on where you are, would not be acceptable. That part, especially in the past, used to be way more true. Nowadays, if you go to an Islam country, probably not going to be acceptable at all. But Western countries, they're not going to have a problem anymore with being a lesbian. Now, that's more of a relatively recent phenomenon, though. Sometimes people can forget that, but that part I would agree.
And then mentally ill and they need locking up for their own good. It was also why one of the cures to these kinds of illnesses was to get us pregnant, get us married, and essentially to get us to conform to what men would want, because that would be like a cure to our illnesses, right? So there's all that around personality disorder. Just like the entire concept of it, I find really just ridiculous, frankly. Then you've got the actual psychiatric criteria. And so I've got my little book here, which is the interview guide for the DSM-5. And I'm going to read you some of the criteria that would diagnose you, I suppose, like the criteria for borderline personality disorder, which is a very, very common diagnosis, unfortunately.
And remember, everything she's about to say, it would need to be persistent and pervasive in order to qualify.
It theoretically has been called the wastebasket of mental health, because it's sort of like where you chuck women and girls that sort of don't really fit into anything. And my argument has always been that people with so-called personality disorder diagnosis usually have some level of distress, trauma, loss, poverty, oppression, something going on in their life, something that's really harming them. That doesn't mean that they're disordered. Their personality is disordered. It means there's something around them that's causing the changes in their thoughts, feelings, behaviors. And so
sometimes, because I think more than one thing is true at the same time, there are people with personality disorders that have absolutely been abused and traumatized. Now, a child gets abused, and then they're a narcissist as an adult. Both are true. They're a narcissist, and they were traumatized and abused. But I think where people like Dr. Salerno would disagree is they would say it doesn't have to be that way. There can be the personality disorder without the massive amount of trauma. And there are people, he's mentioned the studies of borderlines in particular, that because there are some people that want to mix the diagnosis and cancel them out, CPTSD and borderline. But he said there's some borderlines that they were not traumatized, and they've answered this way in therapy and in other studies and etc. So I don't think it's true that it's always trauma. They can both exist in the same person, but I don't think it's the cause.
So on. So I'm going to read you some of these criteria, because I want you to sort of like think to yourself about how these actually relate to trauma and not a personality disorder. So one of the questions here is, have there been times when you've been very upset, almost to the point of being distraught, because you thought someone you loved or needed might leave you one day? When you've been through abuse and trauma or neglect, that is valid, normal, common. So,
and that's basically what? A fear of abandonment?
For me, I'd be like, okay, so if somebody says yes to that question, what caused that? I wouldn't be thinking personality disorder. Do you spend a lot of time worrying or thinking about ways to keep people from leaving you or abandoning you? Again, for me, as a trauma-informed psychologist, I'd be thinking, right, so what happened there then? I wouldn't be thinking clearly BPD.
I mean, I don't think it's how it presents itself. I think that becomes the issue. I think these thoughts can be normal. Now, the consistency of the thoughts, and that can be a variable, but how does this stuff present? Because there's certainly people that present in an extremely emotionally volatile way. I'm someone that was undiagnosed on the spectrum. I thought I thought I had a version of borderline for a while, but I think it really just mimicked it. I think undiagnosed autism mimicked it. And it wasn't until I found a supplement routine that I really kind of was able to square it away. But that's the thing. Like, usually people have issues, and often they come to the surface in addictions, suicidal idealizations, self harm, doing things that self sabotage. And usually there's some emotional volatility and extreme impulsivity in there. And there's something that happens that needs to be worked on. So it's not just trauma a lot of times, I would say. It can also be, but I don't think it's only.
This one says, do you ever feel like you might be someone else, or that you're evil, there's something wrong with you, or maybe that you don't even exist? Does the way that you think about yourself change so often that sometimes you don't know who you are? Again, this is really common after trauma, and especially, I would say, childhood trauma. So again, if this was coming up, I would be thinking, what went on here? How do we help this person? I wouldn't be thinking, this is clearly somebody with a personality disorder. Have you ever been so upset that you told someone that you wanted to hurt or kill yourself? Incredibly common after trauma is the feelings of not wanting to be here anymore, self-harm, that sort of thing.
And again, a lot of this, more than one thing can be true at the same time. And with a lot of this also, it has to be persistent and pervasive. It's one thing if it happens after one traumatic event. After a breakup, that's a normal thing to be a little depressed. And depending on what your normal equilibrium is, that can be more intense for some people than others. But in terms of a personality disorder, it has to be persistent and pervasive from a young age.
Again, for me, not a flag of a disordered personality. This would be, okay, why is this person so distressed, and what's going on for them, and how do we help them? Has anyone ever told you that your moods seem to change a great deal? Do you often have days where your mood changes a lot, so where you might shift back and forth from feeling like your usual self to feeling angry or low or anxious? And how intense is this? When you're in an environment or a situation, or you've been through a lot of trauma, that is actually incredibly common and completely normal. And it's like a feeling of total dysregulation, which again is normal after you've been in situations that dysregulate you, especially if you've been in them long periods of time where you've been up, down, up, down, up, down, in fear, tired, crying, angry, happy, thinking everything's okay, then it isn't okay. Like, why would you suddenly then become like totally stable after an experience like that? That makes no sense.
Okay, that part I agree with, where CPTSD, that's what that would look like. Someone who has a narcissistic parent, or someone's had a prolonged exposure to an abusive relationship, and there's a lot of emotional ups and downs. Yeah, it's not going to be normal for people to stabilize instantly, even when they remove themselves from the toxic relationship or abusive relationship. It's not going to be that seamless. There's going to be a ripple effect that happens. And even if you're no contact, your nervous system can still be trying to regulate. It can still be trying to get back to equilibrium. And some people don't even have an equilibrium that's healthy. They never did, because they grew up in these traumatic environments with a narcissistic parent or abusive parent. And that up and down roller coaster is their normal. And that's why we always say, if home wasn't a safe place for you, be very careful with people who feel like home in adulthood, for this very reason. But someone who has that level of CBTSD, well, what do? Well, no contact's the first step. Then you can do something like EMDR or some other kind of trauma therapy. And I think, and my personal opinion also is, this might get me some pushback, I think men generally respond to different things than women. So I think men, they can talk about their issues, sure. But I think, like the gym, the gym can be a good therapy tool for men. But I also think the talk with your friends and other people that are doing well, I think that's the real therapy of the gym. When you talk to your guy friends about what's going on, and you have people that you can be open and honest with. And that's the whole principle that AA and NA are based on. You are open and honest, and you talk about your stuff. And they say you're only as thick as your secrets. And I think those things are helpful. I think anyone could benefit from those kinds of things, whether it's AA, NA, writing on the steps. I think that's something that, if you want to help someone to become an adult and become self-actualized, you get them to write on the steps. You learn a lot about yourself doing that. Some people never do that. They never take a look at their side of the street. They can never recognize their liabilities or their assets or anything. They just never start that process. But I would recommend that to everybody.
When you're feeling stressed, do you ever get paranoid or suspicious of people you usually trust, or you're afraid that somebody's going to do something to you? This is trauma 101. That's not paranoia. That's not suspicion. That's fear talking. That's shit. Am I going to get hurt again? What do I do to not get hurt again? What if this person who says that they're safe and who says they're going to look after me is not safe and is not going to look after me?
Yeah, I mean, and that can be CPTSD, but it could also be people that have other things as well. Someone can have borderline and CPTSD. Like Dr. Salerno said, there's a reason why they didn't combine them, because they are different. If they weren't different, they would just combine them. Also to note, in America, there is no diagnosis of CPTSD. It's not a thing. In Canada, it's a thing. I'm not sure if it's a thing in England, but I know in America it is not. Just like the word empath isn't even an official term either.
For me, these aren't flags of a personality disorder. They're flags of like, this person doesn't feel safe. This person has had something happen to them.
And even the things that she read, though, they are not the parts that you would consider a personality disorder part. The parts with borderline you would consider a personality disorder, a severe fear of abandonment, impulsivity, an extremely unstable sense of self, acting out with addictions or self-harm, severe depression, severe emptiness on the inside, the emotional volatility. Now, granted, there's a little overlap in there with trauma too. I'm not saying there's not, but it is a little bit different. There's other things going on in there. And a borderline will have that push-pull dynamic a lot of times where if they feel you're leaving, then the fear of abandonment comes up. But then if you get too close, that's a problem too. And they fear losing themselves and being smothered or engulfed. So then they want to push you away. And then sometimes they'll split, etc. And these are things I have experienced with myself. I've split before. I've lost what they would call object constancy, and I couldn't see the good parts of anyone anymore. So when I talk about some of this stuff, I'm not saying it to demonize anyone. And if anything, I can relate to the many things I talk about. I understand it. It's not to demonize. And some people think it is. They think, no, you're demonizing, you're judging, you're doing this. It's like, no, I mean, with the splitting and object constancy and the addictions and the depression and the anxiety, no, I totally get all that stuff. So I don't judge anyone with that stuff. As the shepherd of black sheep, all of these things are things that I help people with. And I think I'm pretty good at helping people through them because I've been there. I've been there with addictions and anxiety and depression and the unstable sense of self and the love addictions and all of that. I've been through all of it.
We need to find a way of supporting them. So I could go on and on and on also about like the psychometrics and the criteria and all that sort of stuff. But I think I've made many of my points as to why I don't subscribe to any personality disorder, but I use borderline personality disorder as an example. I'm not saying that the things people are going through are not valid. The things they're going through are valid. It's just that I don't see those as a disordered personality that they're going to have for the rest of their life, especially considering that the research demonstrates that personality shifts all the way through your life.
And I would really have to take a look at that too, because especially with narcissism, unless they can admit they have a problem and then become willing to do something about it, I don't see them change that often. I don't say impossible. I just say I don't see it very often. I think they are two different things. But what do you think out there, chat? Should I go over some more of her videos, or have you had enough of her? Because there's a lot of stuff. Joining late. Curious one. You want me to go over some more of her stuff? We could. No more, they say. No more. I mean, that's good enough. We went through a lot of her content there. But we got the gist. We got the gist for the most part of what she says. And like I said, I don't really understand the aversion to labeling. I don't really get it. I mean, I do agree the behaviors are more important, but I don't think it's minimizing or an excuse to label anyone with some of this stuff. And in fact, if anything, it can help victims make sense a little more, and it can help the person who has the issue at least know, okay, at least I know now what the issue is. That's especially true of borderline. More borderlines are going to admit they have an issue than narcissists by far. And more borderlines, their issues are going to be more on the surface. You're going to see them. And I think for them, it might even help. People of that label think they're better than others, from my experience. As in the people who are labeling others with narcissism, or any label. I mean, I don't know if it's always that they would think they're better than. I don't tell anyone to be throwing around the terms either, for that matter. I don't think anyone should be weaponizing the term, and at the first sign of a disagreement, you're a narcissist or you're gaslighting. No, that's not what that means. For the reasons we just said, it has to be persistent and pervasive over many areas of life. And there are tactics narcissists use that are manipulation tactics: moving the goalpost, Darvo, word salad, twisting and distorting, being slippery. Doing that a little bit doesn't make you a narcissist. And anyone can do some of these toxic behaviors too. Anyone can lie. Anyone can cheat. It doesn't mean they're a narcissist. That's why I think the diagnosed asshole thing is a good thing to have too. For those who don't know that, I've invented a diagnosis of asshole. My other diagnosis is nuance deficiency disorder. But the other one is an asshole is someone that is extremely rude or obnoxious, selfish, or inconsiderate of others on a consistent basis. And I think it's good to have a step before a full-blown narcissist. But I think the labels they're helpful tools, but I don't think even if someone gets diagnosed with something, I don't think they should be married to that diagnosis. I don't think a borderline should get married to it, just like I don't think a narcissist should get married to it either. Because the way I see things is, mindset and how we talk to ourselves is humongous. So if someone's going to constantly say, I'm a diagnosed narcissist, I'm a diagnosed narcissist, I'm a diagnosed borderline. And it's the same issue I have with people that say in AA and NA, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict. The more you say that, the more it becomes true to me. Now, I know in AA and NA, they say it so that you don't forget, because they'll say one is too many, 1,000 is never enough. And I mean, I think the more you say that, the more it becomes true too. So that's my only disagreement with AA and NA there. But I don't think anyone should be married to them. It's like, I think the goal should be, especially with borderlines, to move through it. You don't have to be, it's not a ball and chain that you're always going to be borderline. I think DBT helps. Trauma therapy can help. Mindset stuff can help. Sleep, diet, and exercise can help. Supplementation can help. Hormone regulation can help. I don't think there's one thing that's going to be a silver bullet, but many things contribute to actually helping somebody out. That's what I would say to that. Let's see what it's saying. Because I invented it. I invented a diagnosed asshole, and I invented nuance deficiency disorder. Someone with nuance deficiency disorder is someone that doesn't recognize that more than one thing can be true at the same time. They think in black and white. A lot of times they lack object constancy. But those are the things I see them struggle with. Yes, it cheapens the terms. A table is a table. Calling it one helps, but sometimes you might be dealing with a chair. You're right. The pattern is key. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying for anyone to be married. And you all hear me say, don't get caught up on if they're a narcissist or not. And if it helps you to recognize some of the pattern, great. But ultimately, once you recognize the pattern, their label doesn't matter anymore. The label matters to help you get that first level of awareness. That's why we all use the word. We use the word because it stands out and it can help people get that awareness for the first time. Yeah, and some people do. Do you mean the narcissists themselves or borderlines? Because yeah, it happens. It does, and I'm not for that because when they're using it as an excuse, yeah, that's avoiding accountability. Or they'll do it for impression management. And this is something I want to talk to Dr. Mark Ettinson about. If you're familiar with him, I interviewed him about 18 months ago. But some of how he talks about narcissism, it's almost like he's given them too much of a free pass. He has a very charitable explanation for why they do what they do. And we'll have a discussion about that, I think, at some point. Yeah, I can definitely do that. Talk more about radical self-respect. Yeah, black and white thinking is so difficult to deal with in a person's personality. Yeah, it's obnoxious. It's obnoxious, and it's hard to have a nuanced discussion with them because it's all this or all that, right or wrong, black or white. That's tough. Life has shades of gray. But what is radical self respect? I mean, I have a whole radical self respect system where it starts. I mentioned some of this yesterday, but mental health and addictions, getting into a good place with them. And I say it lightly, but those are very important things that are not always easy to get under control. But they're the first two things. And they're the first two things because if you have addictions and mental health issues, it's going to get in the way of everything else. Guaranteed. But then mindset, getting a good belief in yourself, eliminating negative self talk, because mindset, as corny as it sounds, attitude determines altitude, as Tony Robbins would say. I agree. Or I like listening to Les Brown. I think he's pretty cool too. But I think that mindset stuff, getting your mind right. Or for the Wire fans out there, what does Avon Barksdale say to the people in jail? He goes, you only serve 2 days, the day you come in and the day you come out, if you have your mind right. So that's how he would say it. He goes, once you get your mind right, the rest of the days just go by. But the guy named Cuddy in The Wire, he said, I don't know, man. I've been here 14 years. So, but the other things, radical self-respect, starts with mindset, then your sleep, diet, and exercise routine. I think exercise is extremely important. Try to eliminate some high fructose corn syrup, processed foods, fast foods. And once you get into a good place with it, your body gets more sensitive to it. So now for me, if I were to stop eating good, I'd feel like trash. If I would stop working out 4 times a week, I'd feel like trash. If I don't get enough sleep, I feel like trash. But then from there, you have your career life, your romantic life, your friendships, your hobbies, and then just your overall ideal life. That's the radical self-respect system, and eliminating bad habits all throughout that. And then what I do for people is we work on a couple of those areas and then we talk about things. And in the process of talking about things, it jars things from my memory that just wouldn't normally get thought of. And, usually 5 or 6 sessions for people. Yeah, probably about 5 sessions. And they get a lot of good work done in those 5 sessions. And I get them like headed in the right direction. So and radical self-respect is also not tolerating disrespect, believing people's actions more than their words, not projecting your good qualities onto somebody else and expecting them to have the same heart that you do, not giving endless second chances, being very mindful of what your definition of good is. There's that meme that's always going around, being good doesn't get you loved, being good gets you used. And I would say to those people, what is your definition of good? Because I would say if you really identify with that meme, you probably have a problematic definition of good. Are you too forgiving? Are you overlooking disrespect? Are you projecting your good qualities onto them? Are you ignoring their actions and trying to believe their words? I would say none of those things are being good. So you have to really be mindful of your definition of good. I'm an alcoholic and become frustrated in therapy. That's my whole identity. Is that what your therapist says, or is that what you have thought of yourself? I mean, because that is the thing with AA, and I've been to AA. that it does become their identity. AA is kind of like a soft cult. Of all the cults, I think it's a not really a harmful cult because it actually does help some people. But I shouldn't say it is a cult even. I should say it's got some cult-like properties. How about that? That's more accurate. And I think, but they make their whole identity, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, I'm sick. And those are the things they say to themselves over and over again. But it does give them a sense of community. It does give them a sense of purpose. They get some dopamine hits from collecting their sober time or clean time. I mean, it does a lot of things that are ingredients of a healthy life. And a lot of people could use some of that stuff. Because I think, like I said, anyone could be addicted to something. I think everyone uses something. It's just a matter of what they use and how frequently they use it. But given that, I think anyone could relate to AA and NA in that frame. I have ADHD raised by BPD mother. I cannot sustain a stable schedule. So, I mean, especially for someone with ADHD, it's super hard, but I think that's what makes it super important too. And I think trusting yourself to do it. And I get it. There's certain things I can absolutely trust myself to do, and I do them no matter what. But I really have to get into the mindset of, okay, I have to do this, and then trust myself to do that and follow through. But usually people with ADHD, they're going to struggle with certain elements of consistency and focus, scattered. There's many things that can go into it because not all people with ADHD are going to be exactly the same either. What are the things that you struggle with? What are the things what happens when you're trying to sustain a schedule? I have criticisms of therapeutic systems. AA didn't help me. I had to sober up myself when I did. Yeah, and there are people that can do that. AA and NA would have people not believe that. They would say, nope, if you stop coming here, you're going to relapse. And that can be true of some people, but it's not everyone's story. There are different ways to do things. There are different ways that can work for different people. I think AA and NA can work for people, but it's not for everybody. Definitely not for everybody. But for the people it works for, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. I'm not going to say you're doing it wrong. And they have a certain program to them. My friend Lisa, who I interviewed before, she used to go to NA. And that's why I'd even got introduced to her, because another person in NA told me about her. And she changed my life, honestly. But she used to go. And then she started taking medicine for ADHD, now that you mention it. And then she wasn't allowed back because she broke their protocol. But I truly believe, and I believe this because of my supplement routine, certain people's brains, there's just something going on there that I don't know if you want to call it a chemical imbalance, a hormone imbalance, or something, whatever it is. Supplements have really helped me. Now, will that be everyone's story? No, it's not going to be everyone's story, but that was my story. And I think for some people, if they have ADHD, sometimes stimulant medication can really help them. Me personally, I hate stimulants, so I'd never do them. But for some people, it meshes well with their brain chemistry and they do better. And who am I to tell someone that's doing better with that? It's like, do better. Who am I to tell you you're doing it wrong? Do what works for you. That's how I see it. You do what works for you. Live and let live. I'm a big fan of that. But certain people, when they get too subscribed to an ideology, they really struggle with that. They struggle with the live and let live. They think, nope, you have to do it my way because my way is the right way. And if you're not doing it my way, you're doing it wrong. I'm self-employed, so I'm all over the place. Can't wake up consistency. Can't keep up with healthy self-care. And then spinal. Yeah, I can relate to that because I'm self-employed now too. And like, my focus can be scattershot throughout the day. I obsessively make content throughout the day, but I sometimes think I could be more concise with it. But when you're self-employed, there's no one looking over your shoulder, really. You really gotta self-monitor. And it is tough. A consistent sleep time and end time. Tim Ferriss would say the bookshelves of the day. You can control what you do easiest first thing in the morning and then before you get to the bed. I'm better at controlling what I do in the morning than I am at night, because at night I'm more awake, but I'm a little more scattered. In the morning, I'm not a morning person, but I have a pretty strict morning routine. Well, mind-blowing story. Yeah, not good. But she found what's worked for her now, though, too. Before that, she had unmedicated ADHD. And so she had the problems that came with that. And I do think a spiritual component can put a band-aid on some of that stuff. But in my own experience, the ceiling of your potential gets lowered. If you've got a big issue, ADHD, undiagnosed autism, CPTSD, severe anxiety, severe depression, neurodivergent in some way, if you don't have a good routine for that or something, your ceiling of your potential is going to go down. That's just my experience. And that's where isolation can be a problem. Isolation can be a problem. I mean, do you have friends? I think friends are helpful. Guy friends, women friends, just people you can talk to. Because there's been studies about, they studied people's entire lives. I think Harvard did lifelong studies. The number one determining factor of how happy they were the quality of their relationships. Not even just romantic relationships, friendships too. That's how important that is. It's where I get caught up on that is when you're self-employed, you got to find a way to make money. And if you're not in a good place with money, it seems all encompassing. Like you have to be obsessed until you get into a good place with it. But then it becomes a trade. Like I would love to be living life and traveling the world and meeting the people I've been able to meet because of social media. But it doesn't seem like I'm able to, because I got to keep on having the nose to the grindstone to get by. And, I've been doing this for a few years now, and I've been able to get away with not having a job, but I have to really focus to try to get more money out of what I do so I can live more life too, because I'm doing what I got to do, but hopefully it's with the end goal of all this work snowballing into something that I'm not going to have to keep my foot so hard on the gas, because that's exhausting. Self-healing is great, but it takes a strong person in doing so. It's time for me to focus on myself. I'm in baby steps, but I don't dare do stimulants, meditation, isolation right now best for me. I mean, I'm a big fan of meditation. I mean, they've said people that do meditation 20 minutes a day for a couple months, it's just as good at helping depression as SSRIs or SNRIs. And I've heard the same thing about getting a pet, for that matter. Getting a dog can be just as effective as SSRIs as well. And again, if ADHD meds aren't for you, they're not for you. I got no problems with that. Now, I would also say maybe there are supplements that could help too. Ashwagandha, tyrosine, things like that. A good probiotic, vitamin D3. I got pushback recently for being critical on a comment about Kundalini awakening. I experienced pushback and regret my comment. I can want to be right. What works, works. You regret your comment. Well, what was the pushback you got? And then what was your comment? I had to leave my field because of my issues. I lost touch with my peers. I didn't want to bring them down. I thought it was the respectful thing to do, so no friends. Now, that's kind of like, I get it, but it's kind of a martyr thing there a little bit. I think sometimes you'd be surprised that if you give someone the opportunity to help you, I don't think it's as much of a burden as you think. And I get it. I can struggle to reach out for help too, so I get it. But I think I'm the type of person that if someone reaches out to me for help, it's almost flattering that, oh, they felt comfortable enough to me to talk to me about something that deep and important. And maybe that's a way to see it. And maybe there are people like me out there that, if they're good friends of yours, maybe that's how they'll see it too. Now, but I fully admit it's harder for me to reach out that way to others. But there are certain people that I know are emotionally safe that I could do that with. And I think that kind of thing is priceless. Amen to that. Danielle Joe. I mean, she comments a lot on my shorts too, which I love. And yeah, I'm not sure if you guys like these lives better than the 10 to 15 minute long videos where I'm just giving a monologue. I do enjoy the back and forth, but it's about what people like. I think, a combination of both is helpful, I would say. But the other things for ADHD supplement wise, GABA helps, magnesium can help, taurine can help. They are lawyers. They don't have time for me now. We went to law school together. Yeah, I mean, lawyers are pretty busy. And lawyers aren't always known for their empathy, I would say. Lawyers more known for their ruthlessness a lot of times. Live's good for you? All right. Check one down for Danielle. Live. I mean, the 10 to 15 minute videos, they're harder for me to do because it's harder to get all the words right. Because I'm so used to doing 60-second sound bites that when I try to extend that for 10 minutes, it's hard. Lives like this are different because I'm pretty good at just spitballing. The pushback was that different things work for everyone. I came from a place whose experienced spiritual bypassing that messed me up, but the others were unnerved and I regret it. So the other person said that different things work for everyone. And you came from a place where people were saying, no, just stuff it and move forward. And when they said that to you, I see. So it kind of spliced wrong with your conditioning. Thank you. I appreciate that. I've been having a harder time coming up with the ideas for the 15-minute ones because it doesn't seem like sometimes things don't seem worthy of a 15-minute video. A lot of things are worthy of a 60-second video, but a 15-minute video, even though it's not that much more, it seems like it takes a lot of mental bandwidth. But even doing this for an hour or two, this doesn't feel like it takes a lot of mental bandwidth. The hardest part is just pressing live. But for those other videos, it's different. Yeah, well, I mean, what do you do now to be self-employed? Woo! Desert Wings. This is my first time watching you live. I've only seen your interviews with Dr. Salerno. Well, we've had about 4 of those by now, right? And I always enjoy talking to Dr. Salerno because I am more in alignment with him than I am with most people. And I'll be talking to him and Dr. Simon both coming up soon too. We're going to have a little panel show. So that'd be pretty interesting. If you have any questions you would want to see me ask them, let me know because they're going to be in the same room together. I got a couple ideas. When I say the same room, I mean the same room digitally. I mean, spitball and racks in the watch time too. Because I think the monologues get boring. Like 60 seconds is not enough to get bored. But a 10 to 15 minute video, depending on, it's got to be a good topic. right? That's got to be a good topic. And when I'm doing live, I can break down other people's stuff like Dr. Jessica Taylor or Dr. Orion Taraban. I also got a good idea. Someone wants me to start breaking down Love Island episodes because they were saying to me there's a lot of narcissistic traits in there, narcissistic behaviors. And I was like, yeah, probably a good idea. Work for Spark, Uber, gig work. I used to love doing Uber and Lyft. The problem was it just killed my car. But for the kind of personality I have, I like the conversations with strangers. And I like and then the car rides over and it's done. So for an outgoing introvert like me, it's a good way to meet new people. And I used to be a taxi driver before I was an Uber and Lyft driver. Taxi driving 10 years ago, before Uber and Lyft came around, that was a good job, actually. You get paid $3.25 a mile, $10 minimum fare, and you'd be coming home with $500 a night on the weekends. Not always that much, but there was plenty of times when you did. And it used to be a great job. But Uber and Lyft just don't pay. They don't pay like that anymore. Oh, you did. So maybe that's which subreddit did you post it in? Because I sometimes get external views and I'm thinking to myself, where the hell are these views coming from? Because I don't usually post them on Facebook myself anymore. But perhaps Reddit's where they're coming from. Where is that? A Sonoran Desert. I hope so too. If they're playing, are they playing the lottery? Ah, small world out there, huh? Where is the Sonoran Desert? Or is that a made up place? It's been a while since I played the lottery. There used to be a time when I wanted to be a professional Texas Hold'em player, but that didn't go very well. It's hard. Arizona. I got a friend out in Arizona. He's always asking me to come visit, but I haven't. He used to live around here. And he got me in touch with a dog whisperer. So I had a great deal for a couple of years, about 7, 8 years ago. I was living at a farmhouse for free, and I just had to watch a couple dogs, some aggressive dogs. But that was pretty cool. I've had a wild and checkered existence, a lot of ups and downs and lefts and rights. But I was doing Uber and Lyft when I was there too. And I miss it. I miss that kind of stuff where you can kind of go on adventures. You never know where you're going to go. It was just tough because the pay, they really clowned the pay. Well, I'd like to see people support one another. I think that's great to see. And what do you got to think? Should I invite Dr. Jessica Taylor on the show too? The person I was breaking down earlier? I think if she thinks, as long as I'm not going to attack her, I think she would like it. Yeah, the adventures are the best part. Oh, okay. And you shared the Dr. Salerno interviews? That's good. Well, I'm glad they're getting out there. A lot of people like Dr. Salerno. But I would talk to Dr. Jessica Taylor. I mean, she might, if she's anything like her followers, she's not going to like me. Her followers didn't like me very much. But I was thinking, no, I just want to have a discussion. I mean, I might disagree. I can't promise you I'm not going to disagree with you, but I think we can have a discussion. Me too. I'm for all of the perspectives. I was going to talk to AJ Mahari. Are you familiar with her? She talks a lot about borderline. She was going to come by, but she backed out of coming on. I don't think she's the biggest fan of Dr. Salerno, and that's part of the reason she didn't. But I was willing to talk to her. Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to her for hours a few weeks ago on the phone, a month ago. When I invited her on the show, I thought it went great. I thought we had a great conversation. but something about Dr. Salerno rubs her the wrong way. Yeah, I mean, the genetic component's certainly a thing, I think. I don't think it's like that's what other people have a problem with him saying. They think, no, trauma, this genetic thing's overblown. I was like, no, it's just, it is what it is. It's there. It's there. I mean, how else do you explain the fact that not everyone who has experienced childhood trauma doesn't turn into a narcissist? How do you explain that? To me, you can't. You can't. There is no explaining it. Even Jordan Peterson was saying that the other day on Piers Morgan, a couple months ago. Yeah, just like monsters are not created because they had a bad childhood. Because there's people that have awful childhoods and they turn into pretty good people. Not everyone has the impaired empathy, heartless version, but some people do. And I think that genetic predisposition is a big part of why. Yeah, I mean, Dr. Salerno and I think I might have did the first one with him over a year ago now. Man, the time's flying by. As Jackson Brown said, in the end, it's the wink of an eye. So time flies by. And we'll be in, so June 26th is my next talk with Dr. Salerno. It's not going to be live, though. Probably going to record that. And it'll probably be uploaded June 27th or June 28th. Amen is right, Danielle. Apply Bowen's family therapy. Apply Bowen's family therapy theory plus genetics is the key. What's the Bowen's family? I don't know what that is. It's the key to understanding how personality disorders manifest. Yeah, I don't know. What is Bowen's family theory? I probably have heard it. I just don't remember it. I had a bad childhood. Yeah, like I said, it's not the only thing that creates it. And when Dr. Jessica Taylor there says what she says, I don't buy it. I don't buy that it's just cultural plus trauma. I don't buy it. But don't get me wrong. I say that. I think it contributes. I don't think it makes anyone's life easier. I don't think it only hurts someone. We'll say it that way, but it's not the cause. How about that? But some people, and I'll say this carefully, some people have a very bad childhood and then they use it as fuel to excel. They use it as fuel to become the best version of themselves. And they think, well, I overcame all of this adversity as a kid, and now I'm going to do the best I can as an adult. People have a hard time with that, though. Some people say, no, I don't want the bad things that have happened to me to ever be fuel. And I don't buy that part, though, because for me, I've had a lot of bad stuff happen. And I think once it's already happened, why wouldn't you want to make the best of it once it's already happened? I mean, sure, you would want to prevent bad things if you could, but when it's already occurred, why not? Why not try to make the best of it from there? Is that in like golden child, lost child, scapegoat, black sheep kind of thing? Or are the roles a little bit different? I was re-listening today to my interview with Dr. Chantel. Not Dr. Chantel. Chantel Contarines, the coercive control coach. She really knows her stuff, by the way. I think of the people I've interviewed, she's one of the favorites of mine because she knows her stuff. Okay. So you would disagree with Dr. Salerno. And that's fine. That's fine. So you would say more of the trauma piece is your idea or your thoughts. Can't change past, just move forward to a better future in a positive way. Yeah, that's how I see it. You can't change what happened, but we can try to learn from it. And we can try to, it's like they say, the calm sea never made a skilled sailor. And I think with that kind of attitude, it helps. Just like Jim Carrey said too. He said, I don't know if life happens for you or to you, but he says, I try to act like it happens for me so I can best handle the obstacles that come my way. And I thought to myself, why wouldn't you want to think of life like that? What's the downside of thinking of life in that way? I don't see a downside. Oh, so we're split. We're split there. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Dr. Salerno, even he doesn't, Dr. Salerno doesn't dismiss the environmental component. Some people who don't like him, they kind of mischaracterize, I think, what he says. He admits there's the environment plays a part. I think that just the debate is how much of a part. But also at the end of the day, does it really matter? Does it really matter how much of a part it is? If you're a parent, you got to just do the best you can. Do the best you can to be the best parents you can be. And if you already are a narcissist, does it matter if it's trauma based or genetic based? Does it change what you have to do to improve moving forward? I don't think so. I mean, you do what you got to do for behavior modification. You can go to trauma therapy. But that's what Dr. Salerno would also say. He would say trauma therapy, not necessarily effective for a narcissist because it's a different thing. But a narcissist can also have trauma. So, but again, that depends. It depends on how it matters to the extent that the solutions are different. Yeah, I mean, and I've got no problems talking to all of the people. I'll invite Dr. Jessica Taylor. I'll invite Dr. Mark Ettinson. We talk to Salerno and Simon again. And I mean, the only people I haven't spoken to in the space that are fairly popular, Dr. Romney, Richard Grannon, Sam Vaknin. Although I'm not the big, I've bad talked Sam Vaknin, so he probably wouldn't come on the show. But I shouldn't even say I bad talked him. I just told the truth. I told the truth about his background. So who else? I wanted Dr. Romney, but I might not be big enough yet to get her on the show. She goes on Diary of a CEO, Lewis Howes, the big boys. Not that big yet. One day I will be. Not yet though. But Richard Grannon, he might be interesting. He might be interesting to talk to. And there's a couple other narcissistic abuse coaches out there that they were pretty big on YouTube, but their numbers seem to have dropped. I've also really loved Meredith Miller. She was the OG, in my opinion. So she does. Yeah. That's not surprising. Now, see, like, I would want to have a discussion with Dr. Romney, and I don't think she would even like that. She just likes being the role of expert, and then the host, they just ask her questions, and she gets to play the role of expert and just gives them their thoughts. But I know from some of the clips I've seen on A Diary of a CEO, and I should go over some of those too, now that I'm thinking about it. I should look up some of the clips, because some of the stuff I would disagree with her on sometimes, which is sacrilegious to say, I know, but I don't agree with all of it. I didn't like her definition of gaslighting. And then even Dr. K was like, all narcissists are insecure and overcompensating for insecurity. I'm like, not always. There are certainly some, but not always. Got to watch that. Like, I like what Dr. George Simon says, not black and white. Don't paint with the broad brush. I really like all these folks. I've learned so much from everyone. I mean, that's how I see it. I take what I like and I leave the rest. I haven't really listened to much Sam Vaknin recently. I haven't listened to much Richard Grannon recently. But I've seen Mark Vicente. He was hanging out with Richard Grannon in Portugal. I'd be more likely to invite Mark Vicente on. He was part of that cult. I forget the name of the cult, but he was in a cult. But he's friends with Vanessa Reiser, who I interviewed before too. So he might be coming on. So I got to ask him to come on. Brandon Clear Minds from Instagram, who blew up since November. Trying to get him back on, or on for the first time, I should say. So we got some busy stuff. We got some a lot of stuff coming up here. All right. But I think it's about time to wrap up here, unless any of you got some more questions you want to ask real quick. All right. Yeah, so remember to like the video if you're here. Hit that notification bell. And if you do any involvement with Facebook or Reddit or anywhere else where you can put a link, share some of the stuff. Yes, Dr. Simon says character matters. What you do and how you adjust over time to improve your quality of life and relationships matter. Absolutely. His most recent book, I don't know if you've read it, but The 10 Essentials for Character. It's a good book. So he's got 3: In Sheep's Clothing, Character Disturbance, and The 10 Essentials for Character. I mean, I like Dr. Simon. I probably subscribe to his way of thinking most of all. He's probably number one. And yes, he's absolutely influenced Dr. Salerno, but they will have a disagreement or two if I allow it to happen. And I think I will allow it to happen because it'll be interesting. But I already know the one thing they're going to disagree about. But it'll be interesting. It'll be a surprise for you all. It'd be interesting. But I like he has Dr. Simon was the original trailblazer because what he did was he was the first one to say, yeah, not all insecure, not all overcompensating for insecurity, and not all bullies are insecure. He's the one that brought this work to the forefront. And all of these other things that the traditional paradigms they just didn't get. They didn't understand it. So a lot of good stuff in that book, Character Disturbance in particular. But all right, it's time to rock and roll. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. But thanks for watching, everybody. Like I said, there's going to be more of these streams here too, so keep your eyes open for them. I'll probably pop in a couple 10 to 15 minute videos too. Dr. Simon is like a soothing cup of golden milk that is very calming. Yeah, he's good. Him and I have some great discussions together. He's been on the show twice, and it just kind of it flows. It flows. To sum up, all the thinking is to be successful at achieving a goal. You must be a positive thinker. 1000%. It's a spell. How we talk to ourselves and what we believe is super powerful. All right, my man. Keep your head up too. Things will get better one day at a time. This too shall pass, as they say. And you have some support here too. Curious One, Danielle, others, Josie from the other night, Desert Wings. You have some support here. You're not alone. All right. Good night, everybody. Good night, Curious One too. You got it, Alex. Good night, Danielle. Good night, Desert Wings.